This is another archival upload of some of my previous mix critique videos. I apologize for the vertical format that this video is about to switch to. This is 311 to 315. This mix was sent in by Jake. Jake, I can already tell by looking at the waveform that this is way too quiet, so I'm going to turn this up a bit. Okay, dude, this sounds really amateur. The biggest problem here is the guitar and the bass are not in tune. Not only are they not in tune with each other, but they're not in tune within themselves. Like, you gotta get your guitars tuned properly, you gotta get them set up properly so they're intonated well, so you're in tune all the way up the neck. That's the biggest problem, is the tuning on the guitar and bass. Other than that, like, what's going on with the guitar tone, man? It sounds like it's just a DI. Like, you can get away with a DI signal for bass in a lot of things, but guitar, like, you need some kind of an amp on that, unless obviously it's an acoustic guitar. Even if you don't have the ability to mic up an amp, throw an amp sim on there. A clean amp sim, like this is clearly just a DI guitar signal. Other than that, the best sounding thing in this whole thing is the drums, and that's because it's clearly programmed sampled drums. Of course, they're gonna sound good. Most sample libraries sound pretty good right out of the gate. I mean, this sounds really amateur overall. If I had to guess, this is probably one of your first tracks, so I definitely don't want to discourage you here, but you got a long way to go on this, even with just getting the source recording right, by making sure your guitars are set up well, even by just, you know, having an amp on your guitar at all. I don't know, man, it really depends what you're trying to do here. If you want to actually learn how to record, like, not just for your own music, but you actually want to get into recording, then by all means, keep at it, like, keep going, learn stuff. It takes time, but you'll get there eventually. Again, this is clearly one of your first tracks. You definitely have a long way to go, but you will absolutely get there if you keep working at it. That being said, if you're only recording out of necessity, if you just have music that you've written and you just want to capture that, then go hire somebody else to record you, man. Recording is a lot. It takes a long time to learn, and even once you think you've learned everything, there's still a lot of experimenting and practice that needs to be done to get to a level where you're actually competent at doing it. I don't want to discourage anybody from learning to record if that's something you really want to do. We've all been there at some point. We've all been beginners at one time or another, and we've spent years learning and practicing and honing our craft so that we can do this really, really well. And if that's what you want for yourself, that's great. Keep at it. But really, to you and anyone else that's watching this video, if you're just learning to record because you want to capture your own music, because you don't think that you can afford to go to a studio, just save up, man. Save up a little longer. Go find a studio. Your music will come out a lot better and a lot faster than the amount of time it's going to take you to learn how to record well. That's a lesson that I think everybody needs to learn. A lot of people these days are recording out of necessity because they think that it's going to be cheaper than going to a studio, but really, in the long run, it's not. If you really want to get into recording, like, I'm many tens of thousands of dollars into this profession. I have a lot of equipment, and it's taken me a lot of time to learn how to use all that stuff well. Now, I'm not saying you need that much equipment, but it does help, and that's what happens when you start recording. You think you're going to start with a little bit, and then you end up being like, oh, well, what if I had this piece of gear? This could be better. If I had this piece of gear, this could be better. And before you know it, you've spent a lot of money on recording equipment. You've probably spent a lot more on recording equipment at one point than it would have cost you to just go to a studio and work with a producer or an engineer and track your music. Like, it seems like a low barrier to entry up front, but the amount of time and money that eventually ends up going into it for you to get to the level that your stuff actually sounds good on your own, you would have been better off saving that time, paying somebody else to record you, and getting your music done and done well and put it out there so you can keep putting out more music. So again, there's nothing wrong with learning to record if that's really what you want to do. That's what I love to do. I've spent a lot of time learning to record and recording because I love doing this. I love the recording process. But I'm not doing this just to record my own music. I'm doing this because I like recording. This mix was sent in by Matt. Okay, the very beginning of the intro sounded pretty good, but when these drums in the background start to come in, there's a lot of low end buildup. Like, it's super, super muddy right there. Hopefully it's just for this part and it actually cleans up when we get actually all the way into the song, but I guess we'll see. All right, when everything kicks in, it sounds pretty good. Honestly, it's really, really close. There's a really big buildup of sub information. So I think that's kind of going to be an issue across everything, because it was really an issue when those drums came in, although that was also a little more up into the low mids as well. But in the actual song, there's just a ton of sub information. You need to either reduce or completely roll off a lot of that low end in the lower instruments. Like, it's really overpowering, and I don't even have a sub in here. So if I had a sub, it would be even more overpowering. Like, you definitely got to turn that down a little bit in the subs.
With ebb and flow, they come and go, manifest in the dead of night from a moment of silence.
Yeah, man, honestly, overall, it sounds decent. The vocals kind of have like this weird honky mid-range quality going on that I would probably try to clean that up a bit. But really, the biggest problem is just the sub frequencies. It's probably in your bass. Sounds like you might have added like some kind of a sub-harmonics generator onto the bass guitar. So definitely reduce that a lot, because it's just really overpowering in the subs. And in the intro part, when those drums kick in, you also got to keep in mind you have a lot of time effects going on the guitars there. Time effects, if you don't EQ the low mids out of those can add a lot of mud. So in combination with the overwhelming low mids and low end in the drums, it was just really muddy in that section. So overall, pretty good job. Just try to clean up the low end a little bit more. This mix was sent in by Cash.
This isn't fair. Here, the end of my senior year. It isn't fair.
All right, and you've definitely over EQ'd a lot of things. Mainly the guitar has been just completely gutted. You specifically asked about the balance in the EQ, so you already know what the problem is. So the problem is the balance in the EQ. Like, you have to spend more time on the faders. Like, you need to get everything leveled really, really well before you start to EQ things, because if you don't, you end up with what you have here, with things being way over EQ'd, things sounding super thin, super empty, because you started EQing to fix problems that should have been fixed just by moving the faders.
And I'm staying here. You see me lying here. It's coursing through my veins.
Also, the guitar tone isn't that great. Part of that is that you've over EQ'd it, but you can still tell the source tone for the guitar wasn't great to begin with. So that might be another reason that you started to over EQ things, is because you just weren't liking the sound of the guitar and were trying to fix it. If something sounds that far off, you just re-record it, reamp it, get a new tone. Like, this is why you should always take a DI of guitars, is so if the tone ends up not working in the mix, you can go back and reamp it later without too much issue. So yeah, I'd say those are the main things. You got to get a better guitar tone, and then once that happens, it'll probably be a little easier for you to balance things well, because clearly you didn't want the guitar too far forward because you knew it didn't sound good. So get a better guitar tone. Then when you go to mix, any mix, start with the faders first. Get a really good fader balance. Get it to the point that it won't get better by moving the faders. When you reach that point, then you can start to EQ things. But that's your main problems here, is the guitar tone was throwing you off. The balance needs to be better, and then it'll be easier for you to EQ things well. This mix was sent in by Kevin.
Wait to see the final frame. Tension mounting, eating at your brain.
Well, you did tell me that it was tracked in a basement in the mid-2000s. It definitely sounds like it was tracked in a basement in the mid-2000s, so I guess I don't know what else I expected. Drums kind of sound like trash. That's partially the way you EQ'd certain things, partially they're not compressed well, but mainly just the source tones of the drums were not recorded well. I'm assuming you had little to no treatment up in this basement, so that's obviously going to be a problem. It's going to give you a lot of phase problems because of all the reverb in, you know, a typical basement space. Yeah, so that's the biggest problem, is the drums. The bass tone is also not great. I'm guessing there weren't new strings on the bass when it was tracked, is what it is at this point. Like, obviously you've been sitting on this track for a while if it was tracked in the mid-2000s, so you're kind of working with what you're working with at this point. But yeah, man, it definitely sounds like it was tracked in a basement. It needs to be re-recorded. Like, there's only so much you can do with bad source recordings. You're not going to be able to get a good mix if the source recordings are complete trash, and I'm sorry, but the source recordings are complete trash. Remember, guys, producing songs is a big part of what I do. I'm really good at making sure that we get great source recordings, make sure that the instruments are tuned well, set up up well at the beginning so that we can get great tones on the way in, and then I'm really good at bringing out great performances out of the musicians. If your options are between recording in an untreated basement or hiring somebody to work with, whether it's me or somebody else, just somebody that actually knows what they're doing, that has a space that's treated well, that can get you good results, even if it costs a bit of money, just save up, hire somebody to record you. You're going to get a lot farther, a lot faster if you have good recordings from the beginning. This mix was sent in by Sebastian.
Uno espera una señal. Las encontrás al 2x3.
It's interesting. It's kind of like a Spanish version of The Strokes is kind of the vibe I'm getting here. A lot of the tones aren't great, which, I mean, if you're going for a Strokes vibe, that's not a big deal. A lot of their recordings didn't really sound, like technically great, but the vocals definitely don't fit with the vibe of everything else. It sounds like you've overcompressed a lot of stuff. The guitar tone's not great, which again, if you're going for a Strokes vibe, not a big deal. Feel like things could have been balanced better. The vocals are definitely a little too far out in front compared to everything else. So balance first, don't compress things as much, and definitely don't start to EQ until you have a good balance, because I feel like whatever you've done with the EQ is kind of taking away from what's already there. And again, it's not a technically great recording, but I get the feeling that that's not really what you were going for. It feels like you were going more for a specific vibe, which is fine. But so like, if you've captured that vibe at recording, you shouldn't have to do a ridiculous amount of processing to make that vibe work together. Don't over EQ things, don't over compress things, make sure the vocals are sitting right. Make sure you get the right vibe for the vocals as well, because again, the vocals feel really out of place, like they're not fitting with the vibe of everything else at all. So definitely work on that. But yeah, so like not a technically great sounding recording, but I don't think that's what you were really going for, and so that's fine, whatever, but you could have executed it a little bit better than you did here.